inherited some pretty good genetics. His father is German and his mother is Italian.
The logical point would be to start with, how did you first learn about bodybuilding and how did you first know that this is what you wanted to devote to?
Through a full range of motion. And as for aerobics, it's not just a waste of time.
The legacy of Mike Mentzer. Man's proper stature is not one of mediocrity, failure, frustration, or defeat, but one of achievement, strength, and nobility. In short, man can and ought to be a hero. Mike Mentzer, 2002. Mike Mentzer was a bodybuilding genius. He was also a bodybuilding mystery. These two truths exist simultaneously and surround one of the most fascinating characters to grace an Olympia stage. Mentzer was the first man ever to achieve a perfect score in an elite contest, the 1978 Mr. Universe. He helped popularize Arthur Jones' high-intensity principles, and his training books were littered with philosophy. Mentzer was also an advocate of calorie counting long before the IIFYM diet emerged. Competitively, some consider him to be among the best to never win an Olympia, and he retired from the sport well before his prime in protest of questionable judging. Life was not easy for Mentzer, nor his brother Ray. Both died early, in their mid to late 40s. Mike was a victim of drug addiction for many years, while Ray suffered from a rare and debilitating kidney disorder. Mike's life and career were derailed by his defeat in the 1980 Mr. Olympia, an event he struggled to recon with. Despite all of this, Mentzer's name is still held respectfully within the bodybuilding community. He's a legend despite never winning an Olympia title. Becoming Mike Mentzer. Mike Mentzer, who was born in 1951 in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, was an early fan of the Iron Game. An unwavering Mentzer, a high school student, started bodybuilding at the age of 12. Mentzer made the decision to build his own body into one of muscle and strength at an early age after being inspired by the physiques he saw in fitness magazines. Mentzer went to the inaugural Mr. Olympia competition in 1965 along with his father's former training buddy. In the Olympia, two events took place. Larry Scott, the winner of the first two Olympia medals, was the first person Mentzer met. Second, Mentzer made the decision that he would eventually become Mr. Olympia as well. Mentzer, who was just 13 years old, even went so far as to lay up a program for his bodybuilding career in the future. It said, Mr. America or Mike Mentzer 1972, Mike Mentzer, the 1974 Mr. Universe, Mike Mentzer, the 1976 Mr. Olympia. The list demonstrates Mentzer's early ambition, even though his dates and forecasts were a little wrong. All assessments point to Mentzer as a remarkable, intense individual. He trained both the physical and the mind simultaneously because he found them both fascinating. Mentzer stood out both in school and at university thanks to his exceptional grades. His dream was to become a psychiatrist, and he was an excellent student. But Mentzer plunged himself into amateur bodybuilding before taking that road. Mentzer entered his first competition in 1969 at the age of 18, and he soon formed a connection that would forever alter his life. Mentzer entered the Air Force the same year he placed 10th in an AAU Mr. America competition.
The logical point would be to start with, how did you first learn about bodybuilding and how did you first know that this is what you wanted to devote to?
Inherited some pretty good genetics. His father is German and his mother is Italian.
Very clear vision.
Although the outcomes were revolutionary, Mentzer's life hindered him from fully showcasing them. Mentzer wasn't involved in bodybuilding until late 1974 due to a shoulder ailment and growing responsibilities in the Air Force. He began by neutering the junior Mr. America, placing first at 190 pounds. Then with a stage cut at 195, he finished third in the 1975 Mr. America competition. He positioned himself behind Robbie Robinson and Roger Collard. Mentzer was one of the sport's most intriguing and contentious figures until he retired in 1980. Over the course of 5 years, he earned the titles of Mr. America and Mr. Universe, took first place in the heavyweight division at the Olympia, and perhaps most importantly, broke away from the conventional bodybuilding methods of his day. Heavy-duty training. Mentzer had a straightforward objective when he started training: to resemble 5-time Mr. Universe Bill Pearl, following the path taken by many in the pre-internet era. He looked to fitness publications for guidance. There was an issue with this. Fitness magazine routines of the 1950s and 60s were frequently high-volume, high-frequency training regimens that ignored the genetic and later pharmacological advantages great bodybuilders possessed. The level of intensity Mentzer applied to his training is not evident in the exercises above. He usually only performed 1 or 2 sets of each exercise. Mentzer's approach, which included forced repetitions and pre-fatigue, was straightforward: destroy the muscles before continuing. He frequently worked out for 45 minutes at a time. It was wholly at odds with the conventional wisdom. For instance, Arnold Schwarzenegger claimed to work out twice a day, 6 days a week in his Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. Why did people take Mentzer's advice? He wrote logically and with clarity. But most significantly, he was an incredible bodybuilder. He placed first in the Mr. Universe competition in 1978. The next year, he became pro and was victorious in the Mr. Olympia heavyweight division.
It is a physiological fact that during exercise, the larger muscles of the body demand more energy than the smaller ones.
Frank Zane was the only one to lose the overall. Mentzer encouraged a generation of bodybuilders to pursue high-intensity training. Along with Jones and Viator, the most well-known example of this was perhaps Dorian Yates, the 6-time Olympia winner who completely altered his strategy after reading HIT books. Yates' subsequent blood and guts practice was essentially a tweaked version of Mentzer's methodology. Revolutionary approach to fitness and life. Mike Mentzer, an objectivist and bodybuilder, believed that philosophy and bodybuilding are one and the same. He followed Arthur Jones' bodybuilding concepts and developed his own theory of bodybuilding, which aimed to help drug-free individuals achieve their full genetic potential within the shortest amount of time. Mentzer's final work, High-Intensity Training the Mike Mentzer Way, detailed the principles of high-intensity weight training, emphasizing brief, infrequent, and intense workouts. Mentzer's diet and nutrition were also important aspects of his bodybuilding philosophy. He recommended eating from all 4 food groups, totaling 4 servings each of high-quality grains and fruits, and 2 each of dairy and protein daily all year round. He believed that carbohydrates should make up the bulk of the caloric intake, 50 to 60%, rather than protein as others preferred. Mentzer's heavy-duty training system involved working 12-hour shifts and then following up with marathon workouts, as was the accepted standard in those days. He met Casey Viator, who trained in very high intensity for very brief 20 to 45 minutes per session and in frequent training sessions. Mentzer and Jones soon became friends, and Jones pioneered the principles of high-intensity training in the late 1960s. Mentzer began investigating a more full application of his principles, training clients in a near experimental manner, evaluating the perfect number of repetitions, exercises, and days of rest to achieve maximum benefits. For over 10 years, Mentzer's heavy-duty program involves 7 to 9 sets per workout on a 3-day-per-week schedule. With the advent of modern bodybuilding by the early 1990s, he modified that routine until there were fewer working sets and more days of rest.
Happen in 5 minutes, it can take several days for some people. Just as there are those individuals that don't tolerate high intensity.
Through a full range of motion. And as for aerobics, it's not just a waste of time.
I was at a drugstore with my mother in my hometown of Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and while she was off doing some shopping.
Mentzer learned how to learn logic and critical thinking from reading and digesting the works of novelist philosopher Ayn Rand. In his last interview before his demise, Mentzer described objectivism as the best philosophy ever devised and criticized the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, which he described as an evil philosophy. He also criticized the teaching of Kantianism in schools and universities and said it was difficult for an objectivist philosopher with a PhD to get a job in any of the universities. In the late 1980s, Mentzer returned to training bodybuilders and writing for Iron Man magazine and spent much of the 1990s regaining his stature in the bodybuilding industry. He formed a clothing company called MYM for Mentzer Yates Mentzer, also known as Heavy Duty Inc. in 1994, based on the success of Don Smith's Crazy Wear bodybuilding apparel. The trio manufactured and distributed their own line of cut-and-sew sportswear with the blessing and promotion of Joe Weider. Mentzer died on June 10, 2001 in Rolling Hills, California due to heart complications, followed by his younger brother and fellow bodybuilder Ray Mentzer. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.